Man is least himself when he talks in his own person. Give him a mask, and he will tell you the truth.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're pulling back the curtain on someone whose wit is legendary, Oscar Wilde. But, there's so much more to him than just those brilliant quotes and the flamboyant image.
Absolutely. Many people know the surface, but beneath that, there's this incredibly complex life, a really profound legacy we want to explore.
So our mission for you today is to go beyond that surface, beyond just the famous wit, and really try to uncover the man behind the mask. And we've got quite a stack of insightful sources to help us do that.
Exactly. We're aiming to unpack the layers of his life. Think about it from his pretty unusual beginnings, his sheer intellectual power, to those groundbreaking literary themes.
And the personal struggles, right?
Oh, definitely the personal struggles. And his influence, which is still felt today. What's really compelling, I think, is seeing how his own experiences seem to echo, sometimes quite directly, through his characters.
Like a kind of code. Sort of, yeah. And understanding that connection, well, it's vital for really appreciating his work, his impact on culture, and even, ongoing discussions about identity and rights.
And these sources we mentioned, we've got detailed biographies painting a vivid picture, literary analyses digging into the works, and even some quite specific medical discussions about his final illness.
It allows us to piece things together.
Yeah, get ready for some surprising facts, connecting maybe disparate bits of information, and looking at how his private world really deeply informed his public art, the prodigy, and the peculiar upbringing. Okay, let's unpack this then. Before the famous wit, before the green carnations, who was the young Oscar Wilde, let's start with his early life, his education. Our sources paint a fascinating picture.
They really do. It's remarkable how those early foundations seem to lay the groundwork for everything that followed. He was exceptionally well educated, prestigious universities in Ireland, then Oxford.
Trinity College, Dublin, then Magdalen College at Oxford, right?
Exactly. And he had that wonderful quote, didn't he? One can never be overdressed or overeducated. Sort of sums him up perfectly.
I was fascinated by the detail about his photographic memory. The sources mention he could just learn and recall huge passages of writing effortlessly. How did that actually shape things for him, beyond just making exams easier?
Well, that's a great point. It wasn't just about ease. It meant he could absorb and internalize just vast amounts of literature, philosophy, history, which arguably fueled that legendary wit later on. He could pull references seemingly out of nowhere.
Okay, that makes sense.
And another thing is his linguistic talent. Fluent in French, German, Italian, ancient Greek. But here's a curious detail, something that maybe raises a little question about identity early on.
Oh.
Despite all that fluency, apparently he couldn't speak a word of his mother tongue, Irish, which is quite telling perhaps given the context of Ireland at the time.
And his family, reading about them, they sound straight out of one of his own plays.
Don't they just? His parents were quite famous in their own right. His mother, Jane Wilde, a passionate Irish nationalist, wrote poetry for the revolutionary Young Irelanders.
Under the name Speranza, I think.
That's the one. And his father, Sir William Wilde, was Queen Victoria's own eye surgeon. He was even knighted for his work.
So quite the intellectual and public-facing household.
Absolutely. And that background likely contributed hugely to his own confidence, both intellectually and socially. But then there's this truly peculiar and quite tragic detail mentioned too.
The fire.
Yes, the loss of his two half-sisters. One's dress caught fire while dancing near a fireplace. The other died trying to save her. An event like that, well, it can't help but shape a person, can it?
Yeah,
deeply.
No, absolutely not. And then there's that other detail from his early childhood. The sources mention his mother dressing him in girls' clothing as a young boy. How do the biographers tend to look at that now?
It's a striking detail, isn't it? The sources often suggest it's particularly interesting, perhaps notable, when you consider his later life, his sexual identity and experiences. It maybe hints at a certain fluidity or a blurring of conventional gender lines right from the beginning. Just adds another complex layer, too. The flamboyant persona and the aesthetic movement.
Okay, so fast forward a bit. This is where it gets really interesting for a lot of people. Wilde wasn't just writing things down. He seemed to be living his art, a performance almost.
Oh, completely. He was described as a rock star in aestheticism. This movement that championed beauty, art for its own sake, above everything else.
Art for art's sake. That was the mantra, wasn't it?
Precisely. Art shouldn't need a moral purpose. It just is. And he was one of its earliest, most vocal champions. He even went on these lecture tours around North America, spreading the word.
To eager audiences, I imagine.
Very much so. Young students, artists, captivated by him.
And his personal style became just legendary. The flamboyance, the famous green carnations in the lapel, even his home decor. The sources mention decorating his room with dragons on a blue ceiling, peacock feathers on the walls. He wasn't just talking about aestheticism, he was literally living inside it.
He embodied it. And this really brings up that crucial point about the line, for him, between art and life. It was incredibly blurred. His wit, even just in everyday conversation, was just unparalleled. It defined his public image.
Like that famous story at Customs.
Exactly. Arriving in the U.S. in 1882, asked if he has anything to declare. His response, only my genius.
Just incredible confidence.
Utter confidence. The kind of self-styling, that persona, it became synonymous with Oscar Wilde.
Yeah.
3, a literary life. Depth beyond the surface.
So most people know the picture of Dorian Gray, obviously, and the importance of being earnest. But the sources make it really clear his literary output was actually much broader, more varied than maybe some realize.
Absolutely. I mean, Dorian Gray was his only novel, and yes, it got criticized pretty heavily at first for what they saw as social taboos and homosexual allusions.
Ahead of its time, perhaps.
Definitely. But he wrote so much more. He penned these quite charming short stories for children, The Happy Prince and other tales, which includes classics like The Selfish Giant. Really beautiful little pieces.
And he wrote essays too, didn't he? I was really interested to see he was deeply engaged with politics, an advocate for socialism, arguing in The Soul of Man under socialism that capitalism actually crushes creativity.
That's right. He argued people become too focused on solving social problems, which distracts from individual artistic development. It shows this thinker who was engaged with much more than just pure aesthetics. He had strong social views.
It adds another dimension.
And what's also remarkable is the sheer volume and variety, especially when you consider, according to the sources, his literary talent was actually quite slow to develop. By age 30, he'd only really published one book of poems.
Really? So the famous stuff came later?
Much later, yeah. The vast majority of his famous plays, Lady Windermere's Fan, A Woman of No Importance, An Ideal Husband, and of course, The Importance of Being Earnest, they all came in a relatively short burst.
And achieved enormous success very quickly.
Huge success. He really hit the absolute peak of his fame and acclaim in the early 1890s. The Importance of Being Earnest was still running, a massive hit, when his whole world just began to unravel. 4, The Double Life and the Tragic Trials.
Right, so this inevitably brings us to his personal life, doesn't it? Especially his sexuality, which, well, ultimately led to his downfall. This is where that public persona and his private reality collided so dramatically.
It's the most crucial and undeniably the most tragic part of his story. You know, he was married to Constance Lloyd, they had 2 sons, but the marriage became strained.
And then he met Robbie Ross.
Yes.
Yeah.
Robert Ross, whose sources suggest kind of seduced him into homosexual acts. Ross became Wilde's first male lover, and interestingly, they remained incredibly close friends right until Wilde's death, even through the worst of it.
But it was his relationship with Lord Alfred Douglas Bosie that really intensified this double life, didn't it?
It certainly did. Douglas, who was much younger, apparently introduced Wilde to the world of gay prostitution. And Wilde began, as the sources detail, meeting numerous young men, rent boys.
Which was incredibly dangerous at the time.
Extremely dangerous. And the conflict just escalated dramatically when Bosie's father, the Marquess of Queensberry, a notoriously brutish man with whom Douglas himself had a terrible relationship, left that calling card at Wilde's club.
The infamous one.
The infamous one. For Oscar Wilde posing sodomite. Just crude and inflammatory.
And Wilde incredibly decided to sue.
Encouraged by Douglas, perhaps caught up in his own success and maybe a sense of invincibility. He made that fateful decision to sue Queensberry for criminal libel.
Which just blew everything wide open. It set off the series of 3 trials in 1895. What stands out from the accounts of those trials?
Oh, it was an unimaginable public spectacle. You have to remember, homosexuality wasn't just a taboo, it was a serious crime. Wilde found himself cross-examined ruthlessly by the barrister Edward Carson.
Who he actually knew from university, didn't he?
He did, which must have added another layer of bitterness. Carson grilled him about suggestive letters to Douglas about the supposed immoral content of Dorian Gray. Initially, Wilde tried to respond with his usual wit, even entertaining the court at times.
But that couldn't last.
No. Queensberry's side had hired private investigators. They dug deep into London's homosexual underground. Suddenly, there was hard evidence. Male prostitutes were tracked down, pressured, forced to testify against Wilde.
He tried to deny it all, but then he stumbled, didn't he? That awful moment when asked if he'd kissed a particular witness?
Yes, his reported response.
Yeah.
It's just chilling. He said the boy was too ugly to be kissed, and that he merely pitied him.
Oh, wow. Just desperation speaking, you imagine.
Absolutely. It speaks volumes about the immense pressure he was under. A man known for his perfect phrasing reduced to that. He later admitted, you sting me and insult me and try to unnerve me, and at times one says things flippantly when one ought to speak more seriously.
So he dropped the case against Queensberry.
On his lawyer's advice, yes. But the damage was done. The trial left him bankrupt. And worse, almost immediately, a warrant was issued for his own arrest on charges of sodomy and gross indecency.
Friends urged him to flee to France, didn't they? But he stayed.
He stayed. Perhaps out of pride, perhaps paralysis. He was arrested on April 6, 1895. Then came his own trials. In the second one, he was famously asked to explain a line from a poem by Douglas, Two Loves.
The love that dare not speak its name.
Precisely. And his response. It was incredibly eloquent, incredibly honest, a moment of real courage, perhaps, but it probably sealed his fate legally.
What did he say?
He described it as that deep spiritual affection that is as pure as it is perfect. It is in this century misunderstood. So much misunderstood that it may be described as the love that dare not speak its name, and on that account of it I am placed where I am now. It is beautiful, it is fine, it is the noblest form of affection. There's nothing unnatural about it. The world mocks at it and sometimes puts one in the pillory for it.
Powerful words, but tragically not persuasive to the court.
No. After a third trial, the jury found him guilty of gross indecency. He was sentenced to the maximum, 2 years of hard labor.
And the humiliation. The sources mention him being forced to stand on a station platform in prison clothes, jeered at, spat upon by the public. It's just horrific to contemplate.
Unimaginable degradation for a man who had been, just weeks before, the toast of London. The art reflecting life. Thematic deep dive into Wilde's works.
So going through all that really highlights how deeply his personal struggles, this enforced double life, seem to resonate in his writing. Let's try and connect those dots now between the life and the major themes in his plays and the novel.
Absolutely. What becomes really clear from the analyses we looked at is this compelling thesis. Wilde often used his characters, perhaps unconsciously sometimes, perhaps deliberately, as a way to grapple with his own inner conflicts. It's almost as if he was portraying aspects of himself through them.
Okay. So the sources suggest we can explore maybe 4 recurrent themes.
That's a useful way to frame it, yes. We see patterns around, let's say, submissive male characters, the idea of dual personalities or masks, the theme of deception, and then moments of quite direct self-portrayal.
Okay, starting with submissive characters, the sources point out how often his male characters seem undermined by women or constantly seeking their approval.
Exactly. Think about the importance of being earnest. Algernon and Jack, for all their wit, are presented as quite dependent on the women's views, needing their permission for marriage.
Right, and Sir Robert Chiltern, in An Ideal Husband, he's manipulated by Mrs. Cheveley and essentially has to obey his wife, Lady Chiltern.
Precisely. Or Sir John Pontefract in A Woman of No Importance, who seems utterly controlled by his wife, Lady Caroline, down to the smallest detail.
So the question the analysis raises is, are these reflections of Wilde himself? Perhaps his own feeling of submission to societal rules, or maybe even aspects of his personal relationships?
It's a compelling question. And it leads nicely into the next theme, dual characters and the mask. This idea of hidden lives, hidden faces, corrupt inner selves beneath a respectable surface.
Which seems almost tailor-made for Wilde's own situation.
It really does. Here's where his life mirrors the art so directly. A married man, father of 2, secretly involved with men, and look at Ernest again. Jack and Algernon both invent these alter egos, Ernest and Bunbury, specifically to escape social constraints, to live a different life.
He goes back to that quote we started with, give him a mask and he will tell you the truth. He seemed fascinated by that idea.
Deeply fascinated. And the theme of deception, well, it's just woven through almost everything. Jack and Algernon deceiving the women they claim to love, Mrs. Arbuthnot, a woman of no importance, hiding the truth about her son's father, Sir Robert Chiltern's secret, and the blackmail plot in An Ideal Husband.
Wilde himself wrote something about deception and love, didn't he?
He did. When one is in love, one always begins by deceiving oneself, and one always ends by deceiving others. It feels almost autobiographical, doesn't it?
Chillingly so. Okay, and the final theme, self-portrait, where the links are perhaps most explicit.
Yes. Wilde himself gave us a kind of key from The Picture of Dorian Gray. He wrote in a letter, and this is fascinating, Basil Hallward is what I think I am. Lord Henry, what the world thinks me. Dorian, what I would like to be in other ages, perhaps.
Wow, that's quite a statement, laying it all out there.
It really is. And perhaps even more striking, according to one source, Wilde explicitly told the actor playing Lord Illingworth in A Woman of No Importance, quite simply, he is myself.
Lord Illingworth, the cynical dandy who turns out to be the illegitimate father.
Exactly. And given that the play was written while Wilde was deeply involved with Lord Alfred Douglas, the suggestion that the young Gerald in the play represents Douglas and Illingworth represents Wilde, well, it's a powerful insight into how his private life was bleeding into his art.
So really, this deep dive shows Wilde wasn't just a witty playwright. He was masterfully transforming his own hidden pain, his own masks, into these universal explorations of identity, hypocrisy, and deception. His personal life was the engine.
Beautifully put. The art and the life are just inextricably linked. 6. Exile, death, and enduring legacy.
His imprisonment, then, effectively marked the end of his literary career, but it wasn't the end of his story.
No, not quite. While he was incarcerated, in those brutal conditions, he wrote De Profundis from the Depths. It's this long, heartbreaking, sometimes bitter letter to Alfred Douglas.
Detailing the prison experience.
Yes, but also reflecting on their relationship, his own spiritual development. He even identifies quite strongly with Jesus Christ as a figure of suffering. He wrote that line, "Suffering is one very long moment."
And physically, prison took a terrible toll. Our sources mention he collapsed from exhaustion and illness, and crucially, ruptured his right eardrum.
Yes, an injury that seems to have had long-term consequences and likely contributed to his death later on.
So upon his release in May 1897, what happened?
He immediately left England, basically fled to France. He lived the last 3 years of his life in self-imposed exile, moving between places, often short of money. He adopted a new name.
Sebastian Melmoth.
That's it. Sebastian, after the martyred saint, often depicted pierced by arrows. And Melmoth, from Melmoth the Wanderer, a Gothic novel written by his great-uncle, a name steeped in suffering and wandering.
He did reunite with Douglas briefly, didn't he, in Naples?
He did, but it was short-lived. Their families intervened, threatened to cut off funds, and force them apart again. Wilde was left largely alone, increasingly miserable, turning more heavily to alcohol.
And he refused to write again, creatively.
He told a friend, heartbreakingly, "I can write, but have lost the joy of writing." The creative spark, it seems, had been extinguished by everything he'd endured.
He died quite young, didn't he, in 1900?
Yes, November 30th, 1900, in a cheap hotel in Paris. He was only 46. The cause of death was cerebral meningitis. Intriguingly, there's been debate about the underlying cause. The old theory of neurosyphilis is now considered wholly inadequate by many medical historians.
So what's the more likely explanation?
A more convincing theory points towards complications from that ear injury he sustained in prison, a chronic middle ear infection, possibly with cholesteatoma, leading to intracranial suppuration, which then resulted in the meningitis.
A direct consequence of his imprisonment, essentially.
It seems very likely, yes.
And even in his final moments, the wit didn't entirely desert him, did it? They're those famous last words.
Yes. Reportedly, looking at the drab wallpaper in his hotel room, he said, "My wallpaper and I are fighting a duel to the death. One or other of us has got to go."
Classic Wilde, even then. And he was received into the Catholic Church just before he died.
Conditionally baptized, yes, a day before his death. He'd apparently quipped earlier that Catholicism was the only religion to die in.
So what about his legacy now, over a century later?
Well, it just continues to grow, doesn't it? He's still incredibly famous for his quotes. So many of them are just part of the language now, often unattributed. People use them without even knowing they're quoting Wilde.
And he was admired by later cultural giants.
Hugely. Think of the Beatles putting him on the cover of Sweet Peppers. Or the Rolling Stones' Mick Jagger actually played Wilde in a short film clip for their song We Love You. He resonated with that rock and roll rebellion, perhaps.
But maybe most importantly, his impact goes way beyond just literature now, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. He's become this enduring icon for the LGBTQ+ community, a symbol of defiance against persecution, of living authentically despite the cost.
And that posthumous pardon in 2017 was significant.
Hugely significant. Under the Alan Turing Law, he and around 50,000 other men convicted of historical homosexual offenses were formally pardoned. It felt like a long overdue acknowledgement of the injustice he suffered. His work, his life, his courage. It really did help pave the way for a more open, maybe more accepting arts world.
Outro.
So we've journeyed through this extraordinary, brilliant, and ultimately tragic life of Oscar Wilde, from that privileged yet really quite peculiar upbringing through the groundbreaking literary work, the dazzling public persona.
To the devastating trials that exposed his private world and led to his downfall and exile. Yeah. And we've seen, haven't we, how profoundly his own experiences, his secrets, his struggles shaped his art, making him this figure of just immense literary and cultural significance.
Definitely. And if we connect all this back to the bigger picture, maybe Wilde's life and work, especially that constant exploration of masks, of duality, of hidden selves, maybe it reminds us that the most authentic truths often aren't found in the grand public statements.
Where then?
Perhaps in the subtle nuances, the contradictions, the hidden struggles of the human spirit. It certainly makes you think again, doesn't it, about the real importance of being earnest in all our lives. What does that truly mean?